Kenny the Dragon. Before I forget. Many years ago, hold on, I know what you are thinking. You're thinking a book about a dragon should start with Once Upon a Time. But this one doesn't, because frankly, I don't really know what once upon a time means. Now, I was once upon a horse, and that was fun. Also, I was once upon a knight galloping on his horse, but that's another story altogether. So instead, let me start our tale with this. Once upon a farm in a town just west from yours, and on a Wednesday many years ago, a rabbit farmer, his wife, and their son Kenneth were preparing to sit down to supper. Now, Kenneth seems a little formal for a boy's name, doesn't it? No kid would say, "Kenneth, can I borrow a pencil?" No, they'd say, "Ken" or "Kenny, can I borrow a pencil?" And no doubt our Kenny would not even notice when they swiped it from his school desk, for, you see, Kenny always had his head buried in a book. And he loved to read all sorts of subjects: science, mysteries, histories, and even fairy tales. In fact, fairy tales and natural history were his two favorite topics, and as far as Kenny was concerned, both held the same merit in the real world. So it is not surprising that he enjoyed going to school. He always asked compelling questions, always did his homework, complete with footnotes and a bibliography, and always had fantastic notions about what he wanted to do when he grew up. One day he'd want to be an astronaut and meet extraterrestrials from a distant planet. The next he'd decide on a jungle explorer looking for living dinosaurs. Or he'd build a submersible that could go deep in the ocean to find lost underwater cities. Each day it was something new. "That kid has such an imagination," his English teacher would say. "His identification of local flora and fauna is quite impressive," his science teacher would say. "Kenny Rabbit? He's kind of out there," his classmates would say. And to a certain degree, they were right. You see, like them, Kenny grew up on a farm, and both his mother and father were farmers. They came from generations of farmers who grew vegetables and raised livestock. So his parents, like most of his neighbors, really didn't have time to read books. They were just too busy tending the farm. "You can't harvest corn with a book," his mom would say. "No bookie book's gonna bring the sheep in at sundown," his dad would say. Regardless of what they thought, though, his parents did their very best to support Kenny in all that he did, right down to listening to his lengthy theories on this and that over dinner. "You see," Kenny would tell them, "it's going to rain because cold air and warm air collide in the upper atmosphere. This creates thunder, and it causes the moisture within the cumulus clouds to fall." "I thought it was going to rain because the cows are laying down," his dad would reply. And most folks in town would have agreed with Kenny's dad. Hold on a second. What was the name of that town? I can't believe I've forgotten. It was near water, if I recall correctly. Dunhill? No, that's in the northern province. Meadow Falls? That's not it either. But it was a stream or a river. Round Brook? Yes, that's it. The town was sort of roundish in layout, with a brook running through the middle of it. Goodness, I can't believe I'd almost forgotten. Not something a fellow in my position should allow. All right, then. So in the little farming town of Round Brook, Kenny lived with his parents, went to school, did his chores on the farm, and filled the rest of his time reading, which is precisely where we find him at the beginning of our tale. Chapter 1. That Devil Scourge. Kenny's father burst into the kitchen, panting heavily. His ears twitched. It was supper time, and Kenny's mom was making her family's favorite, corn chowder. The soup's heavy aroma swirled about as the farmer moved through the room. "Pack all your things, we're out of here, we're moving," Kenny's dad hollered. He was a scraggly, hairy fellow, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and he was trying to catch his breath, as if he'd been running. Moving? Not now, mister, Kenny's mom replied. The corn's not boiling yet, the broth isn't quite right, and I still have to sew patches on Kenneth's trousers for school tomorrow. Kenny's dad paused, walked to the stove, dipped a finger in the pot, and agreed it still wasn't quite right. Get your dirty paws out of my chowder. Wash your hands, have some milk, and tell me what's got you all riled up. She ground a little pepper into her broth. Unlike Kenny's father, she was soft, round, huggable, and seemed to always be adorned in an apron with a spoon in hand. Kenny's dad did as he was told. Then he stroked his ears and started. This afternoon my eyes saw something I wish they'd never seen. I went to bring in the flock up on top of Shepherd's Hill, where they had been a-grazing all day. As soon as I get up there, I see the sheep all huddled and quiet on the far side of the hilltop, and I think to myself, what in the world has got 'em so spooked? So I wander over to the other side of the hill, you know, where them rocks and boulders are. Here, taste this. Better? Yes, much better. So hold on, dear. Kenneth, get out here and set the table. The wooden floorboards creaked as Kenny shuffled into the kitchen, his head buried in a book. He was reading a story about a giant, written about a man named Oscar. Without looking up, the small, skinny lad opened the cupboard and grabbed plates to place on the table. Not plates, bowls, Kenneth. I told you earlier we're having corn chowder tonight. Get your head out of the clouds, put the book down for a minute, and set the table properly. His mom snatched the book out of his paws and set it on the counter. The wooden counter was dinged, scratched, and stained from years of use. Pots and pans hung from the ceiling, right above where Kenny's mom was cooking. She reached over and opened one of the numerous round windows to allow the cool country air into the kitchen. Don't you want to hear the rest of my story? Kenny's dad whimpered through his milk mustache. Of course, dear, of course. What did you find in the rocks? His mom said as she tasted the soup. So there I am, climbing up on them big rocks and boulders. All the while I'm thinking there must be a wolf, a lion, or a bear hiding in there. Remember, I said I heard those weird whooshing sounds coming from the hill last week. Kenny folded the napkins and placed them around the banged-up wooden table. I remember that, he said. I thought... Hold on, son, hold on, his dad interrupted, waving his hands about. So I was making some noises of my own to see if I can spook it off. And that's when I saw it. Kenny stopped setting the table and looked up. Saw what? The gears in the lad's brain began to turn. He realized his father's tale involved some sort of encounter with a carnivorous animal. Kenny figured he could determine just what his dad had seen based on the description. A lion was out of the question. They were far too east for lions. Wolves usually traveled in packs and were rarely seen in these parts, but bears did prefer rocky outcroppings and caves. Well, first, I smell something burning. Not wood, but something smoky-like. Then I see a pair of glowing eyes, and then a head as big as this here table, peers out from an opening in the side of the hill, and it's covered in horns and scales and fur like a crocagator. You mean alligator, Kenny corrected him, though he wondered what sort of alligator had horns and fur. Exactly, but have you ever seen a blue alligator with a neck like a turkey and a body like one of them giant lizardy things in your books? You mean dinosaurs, Dad? Those really did exist, you know. Scientists have even found their bones in old... No, son. It wasn't one of them Brontosaurus rexes. His father looked him in the eyes. It was like one of them flying things that eats pretty maidens and burns castles to the ground. Kenny paused for a moment. It can't be, he said to himself. It couldn't be. He put the last of the silverware in its place on the table. His father just sat there staring at him with his big eyes. Glancing over at his mother, Kenny noticed she had stopped cooking and was looking at them quietly while holding the ladle. He turned back to his father. Dad? Are you talking about a dragon? Yes, son. I'm talking about one of them dragons. He started pacing around the kitchen, waving his arms wildly. "It's taken up residence on the side of Shepherd's Hill, and we gotta sell the farm and move before that devil, that Scourge, comes down and burns everything right to the ground."
Dishes and homework. "Not in a million years," Kenny's mom said. She then blew on her spoonful of soup and sipped it. "But Mom, it's a dragon. I want to go see it before anybody else does." "Who knows what that thing could do to you? You could get bit or scratched up, and it's probably carrying all kinds of diseases. Right, Pa?" As usual, Kenny's father was much calmer now that he had eaten, and Kenny studied him as he started on his third bowl of chowder. The dainty wooden soup spoon looked odd held in his rugged, worn paws. In fact, the lad half waited for his father to lift the bowl up and slurp the remainder of the chowder. Instead, he calmly said, "If Kid thinks he can handle the likes of a dragon, then I think we should let him. After all," he continued, winking at his son, "he ain't no little bunny any more." His mom folded her napkin and set it on the table. She sighed. "All right, but not until you finish the dishes and your homework." "Oh, I can do those later. Let me go now, please." "Dishes and homework first," she repeated as she pointed at him with her spoon. Kenny cleared the table and cleaned the dishes in record time. As he finished drying the last set of soup bowls, he watched the sun sink lower and lower in the darkening sky. When he was finished, he ran into his room and dumped his book bag upside down onto his bed. Textbooks spilled out, pencils rolled off onto the floor, and loose papers scattered like white leaves. Kenny shuffled through it all and picked up Stars and Their Constellations, the book he was supposed to do a book report on. It was his last assignment for the school year, and it would be an easy one for him, as he'd read the astronomy text front to back several times already. Now he simply needed to write the report. Or, he thought, with a little persuasion on my teacher, Miss Skunkmeyer, I could do an oral report instead, and I won't have to write anything. So technically, I'd be finished with my homework. However, an oral book report meant going in front of the class and talking. The last time Kenny had done that, it was on the topic of the migration of the ruby-throated hummingbird for his science class, and it hadn't gone so well. One of his classmates had started snoring loudly, and another hooted, "Snoring! Boring!" bringing snickers to the entire room as Kenny tried to give his presentation. The other kids just didn't get excited about the stuff that he did, but honestly, who wouldn't be fascinated by the idea of a tiny bird flying all over the world by itself? If a little hummingbird could do that, well then, he paused in his thoughts. For there on the bookshelf, next to his copy of Amazing Hummingbird Stories, was an old bestiary he had borrowed from his friend George. He grabbed the leather-bound tome and opened it up. It smelled musty and old, and in one whiff, Kenny was back in George's dim bookshop in a beat-up armchair surrounded by stacks of books. Even though the shop appeared messy, it was quite organized. Yet only George knew where everything was, as he hardly ever left his little literacy sanctuary. When Kenny would visit, the retiree would always recount a story about his past adventures, usually over a game of chess, and he had plenty of new and interesting books to show. Many times he would let Kenny borrow books from the store as long as he took good care of them and returned them in their brand new condition once he was finished. Sometimes he'd just let Kenny keep them as a gift. Kenny flipped through the yellowed pages of a bestiary. Albatross, bear, chimera, dragon, he said aloud. Kenny hadn't finished this book yet and had only read some of the entries. The illustration for the dragon showed a vicious, sinewy, cool monster belching white, hot flames. An actual dragon, the young rabbit said to himself. It's like seeing a living dinosaur. Imagine bringing him to class for the science fair. He turned the page, and there were more pictures. One was of an armed knight fighting a dragon. In one hand the knight held a shield, and the other a long lance with which he was pinning the reptilian beast down on the blackened, scorched earth. Fallen knights littered the background. A little gear in Kenny's mind clicked into place. Maybe I can do my report on this bestiary instead, and add my own field observations, he said, slamming the book shut and shoving it into his worn leather book bag. I better get prepared. Dashing through his house, Kenny grabbed a pot, a pan, some rope, an old broom, and a garbage lid. He strapped the blackened frying pan onto his chest, using the rope in his belt. Placing the pot on his head, he rolled up the sleeves to his flannel shirt and grabbed the broom, the lid, and his book bag as he headed out for the door. His mother and father were sitting in their rockers on the front porch. His dad was smoking his after-dinner pipe while his mom was stitching a patch onto the knee of Kenny's trousers. Without looking up, she said, "I'm glad those are play clothes you're in. Homework finished?" "Yes, Mom," Kenny replied, taking the lantern and hooking it onto the handlebar of his on the spike. "Be careful, Kenneth. I hope you know what you're doing," his father said. He sucked on his pipe and rocked slowly in his chair, watching the sunset. "And tell that varmint not to eat any of my sheep." Kenny turned to his dad as he climbed onto his bicycle. "I'll be fine, Pop. This is most likely an old world worm. They're cold-blooded, so they're very slow once the sun goes down. I can outrun him any old day, should it come to that. Either way, I aim to find out just who he is, where he came from, and what his intentions are." "Don't be out too late," his dad replied, but Kenny had already sped out of.
Chapter 3. Graham Like the Cracker. Kenny left his bicycle at the foot of Shepherd's Hill, near Parish Creek, where he waved to Old Pop's possum, who was at his usual fishing spot. From there, he began hiking to the summit on foot. The weight of his makeshift armor made progress difficult as he worked his way past the oak and maple trees scattered about on the grass-covered hillside. This hill, the largest in the area, had been on his family's property for as long as he could remember. He'd collected butterflies and wildflowers here last summer, read The Wind in the Willows under the large willow tree at the top last fall, and had sled races down the side on the garbage can lid he now held as a shield. It was his prized snow saucer, and it had the scrapes and dents to prove it. Perhaps the dragon would take these marks, along with the blackened pots and pans, to be victorious badges of previously slain drakes, and would be respectful of the little buck. Perhaps the beast would even be a little scared. Kenny made it to the grassy top by sunset. From here he could see the little lamp lights of Round Brook flickering along the horizon. To the west, billowy clouds changed in hue from gold to a fiery orange, then turned red before cooling off into a lovely shade of lavender. As Kenny looked east, he could see the North Star, Polaris, twinkling low in the sky. Directly below, curled up and sleeping on the far side of the hill, was the dragon. He gulped. This animal was bigger than the illustrations in his book. Much bigger. Mesmerized, Kenny slowly approached the monster, happy to be downwind of it on the off chance that it could smell him and attack. He was halfway across the hilltop when he thought the creature had sensed him because it was growling in a long, low tone, just like a lion. A giant, reptilian, bloodthirsty lion. Kenny froze, hoping it would stop and go back to sleep, but the beast never moved, and he soon realized it wasn't growling at all. It was purring. The book didn't mention anything about purring, he whispered to himself. He pulled the bestiary out of his book bag and studied the picture once again. The image depicted a dragon that was slithery, scaly, and very fierce-looking. Kenny then looked up at the specimen in front of him. It was a bit rounder and hairier and scruffier than what was drawn in the bestiary. Kenny held his breath and strained against the gathering dark to see every little detail of the magnificent monster dozing in the twilight. He didn't dare make any noise, even though he was dying to light his lantern for a better view. After a while, the rhythmic purring started to make him feel relaxed. He listened while its large ribs expanded and contracted with each breath. He closed the book and put it into his satchel. At this movement, the great beast cracked open one large, lemon-yellow eye. Kenny froze, mouth agape. The creature's head rose up from the ground and focused on the small rabbit studying him. Then the dragon did a sort of fake stretch and a pretend yawn and settled back down. Of course, you know this move very well. It's the I am pretending to fall asleep, but I am really wide awake move, and is best used on parents when they check on you in your bed at night. The dragon closed his eye, gave out a sigh, then said in a low, gravelly voice, "No throwing rocks at me, or poking me with a stick, or yelling at me, 'cause I won't tolerate it. And don't waste your time pouring water on me to douse my fire, 'cause that doesn't work at all. I just got comfy on a nice, cool spot of grass here, and I'm trying to sleep, so leave your food, and off you go." The dragon's words trailed off, and he began fake sleeping again, making a purring sort of snoring sound. Kenny cleared his throat. "Ahem," Nothing. Still nothing. He had to try another tactic. Were all dragons this unresponsive? No wonder they were practically extinct. Bantling, aren't you here with an offering? A meal? And libation, perhaps? Leave it by my entryway, and then you'd best scurry home. It's getting late. I didn't bring you anything, Kenny stammered. No food? The dragon said, not moving a single scale. Then why on earth have you brought those pots and pans? Surely you were planning on cooking me a delicious dinner. He eyed the garbage can lid shield. And serving it on that large metal platter. Not only had his book not mentioned dragons purring, it hadn't mentioned bringing gifts either. Clearly, the author did not take his subject seriously, or else he hadn't done his research thoroughly. Kenny set his broom lance on the ground. Well, I do have a bestiary that I've been reading, but now I'm not so sure of its accuracy. A bestiary? Really? The dragon's eyes opened wide, and he quickly sat up. He rubbed his scaly paws together. Come on, then, let's have a look. He extended his hand. It was nearly as big as Kenny was and ended in long, sickle-shaped claws. The young rabbit pulled the old book out of his satchel. He grabbed the ribbon bookmark and opened the book to the page titled Dragons. Please don't burn it. I'm borrowing it from a friend of mine. Burn it? What sort of unchancy fire drake do you take me for? Why, I'd just as soon burn my own tail as burn a book. He looked at the title on the cover. The King's Royal Bestiary. Let's see here what it says. The dragon stretched out his long, curly tail and reached it into an opening hidden in the shadows of the rocks and boulders on the hillside. From there he pulled out a pair of metal-framed spectacles and set them on the furry bridge of his nose. To the lad, they were the size of dinner plates. Kenny removed the pot from his head and slowly sat down on it. He didn't want to make any quick movements, but he was ready to bolt in case the beast showed any signs of aggression. Wouldn't you just know it? A book arrives, and there's nary the light to read it in. Do you mind lighting your lantern? Okay, Kenny said. Sure. As he lit the lantern, fireflies began flitting about the top of the hill. They quietly blinked around the monster's giant head, revealing a jagged, toothy grin as he studied the pages. Giving his best performance as a relaxed visitor, Kenny sat back down on his pot and plucked a stalk of grass. Casually chewing it, he asked, How long are you here for? Hard to say, the dragon muttered, flipping through the pages. He snorted. Rubbish! Well written, but the facts are not right at all. How do you mean? Kenny asked. Look here, it says, a dragon's strength is found within its long and dangerous tail. Tying the tail in a knot will render the foul beast harmless, but be warned all drakes kill anything they catch with their vicious coils. Not true. Do you, little bantling, kill everything you encounter? Why, no, Kenny replied. He was wishing that the pot was on his head after all, and he gripped his garbage can lid shield tightly. Exactly, said the dragon, but I could easily say that the general populace pretty much destroys everything they come into contact with. They certainly do when encountering a fellow like me, and I am not killing you at this moment, am I? Kenny thought about this for a minute. Was it some sort of trick? His heart was beating fast and he was ready to take off, leaving everything behind. His parents, of course, would be quite upset at him for abandoning the cooking pot and lantern up on the hill. Certainly George would be cross as well, and Kenny didn't have the allowance to replace the bestiary he was borrowing. He looked up at the dragon. You're not killing me at this moment, no. Nor do I intend to. The truth of the matter is, I've never killed a thing in my life, the dragon said as he closed the book and eyed Kenny. That was the fashion many years ago with the other dragons. They were so earnest, burning down castles, fighting knights, and eating bedizened princesses. That was never my cup of tea. I am more what you'd call a Renaissance fellow. I like to see the world and savor it, not destroy it. So instead of burning down a castle, I would admire its architecture. Instead of fighting a knight, I'd challenge him to a good game of chess. And I'd never eat a princess. Instead, I'd create a wonderful flower arrangement for her to match the silk drapes in her palace, of course. Really? Kenny said. This dragon was certainly not at all what he'd expected. Not a scourge, a devil, or even a nuisance. Well, said the dragon with a sigh, that was how I got by. Live and let live, which was all fine and dandy until I got trapped. Kenny sat down his garbage can lid shield and loosened the frying pan tied to his chest. Go on. It took me completely by surprise, you see. I was snoozing under a tree, very much like this willow right here, when the ground literally opened up and swallowed me. A fissure, Kenny said. You must have been in an earthquake. Whoa! He stood on top of his pot. How did you survive? I drank lava and ate firestones, which allowed me to breathe fire for the first time ever. Of course, they also gave me horrendous heartburn, which I still have to this day, but that doesn't matter because the lava and firestones saved my life. They did? Sure, I sat there under the earth and, well, actually, I caught up on my beauty sleep first. So I slept there under the earth for years and years, but I kept dreaming of life up here. The glorious sunsets, the whispering trees, the birds singing gaily, daffodils, oh, and creme brulee. As he said this, the dragon rose to his full height, causing the swarm of fireflies to swirl and dance around him. As the drake looked up, Kenny followed his gaze to the sky, which was so bright from the Milky Way that he could not tell where the fireflies ended and the stars began. The dragon took in a deep breath and looked back down at Kenny. And so I finally awoke. With my fiery breath, I blasted and burned a tunnel back up to the surface to see it all again. I mean, how could I miss all of this? That's when I arrived here. What a tale, Kenny said. What do you plan on doing now that you're here? Not much. Enjoy some fresh country air, eat a good meal, catch up on my reading, and write some poetry. Actually, I consider myself quite a poet. Would you like to hear some poems? I tried to recite a bit to an older chap who was up here earlier today, but he scurried off. Even after all these years, I suppose I can still have that effect on someone. That was my dad, Kenny said. You scared him good. Scared him? Goodness, was my rhyme that bad? The dragon asked. I don't think you understand your situation, Kenny sighed. You're considered a devil and a scourge to society. Just like it said in that book, folks usually want to hunt you down. The dragon put a claw over his mouth and let out a smoky snicker. Hunt me? For what? Improper etiquette? They are the ones writing horribly inaccurate dragon facts in their books. It should be me who is hunting them down. But you don't... Kenneth! The call rang out across the pasture from the direction of the farm. That's my mom. I gotta go, or they'll be worried. Besides, I gotta get ready for bed, Kenny said as he grabbed his lantern. Can I get my book back, dragon? Graham, the dragon replied. My name is Graham, just like the cracker, except with an E at the end. And it was great chatting with you. Kenny. Well, Kenneth, but everybody calls me Kenny. Well, Kenny, the dragon said as he handed over the makeshift lance and shield. Do come up again. Bring your folks. In fact, let's do dinner tomorrow night. You bring the food, and I'll supply the entertainment. Is your mom a good cook? Tell her I have a ravenous appetite for souffle, glazed carrots, mashed potatoes, and, of course, creme brulee. Oh, okay. I'll ask, Kenny said. And the book? Oh, please, let me give it a read tonight. How I love a good fiction. With that, Kenny dashed back down the hill and hopped onto his bike. Excited, he pedaled toward his house. He couldn't wait to tell his parents how curious, how interesting the dragon, whose name happened to be Graham, truly was.